Tara, one of the things I've been wanting to ask you about is that, we talk a lot here about the need to invent new ways of communicating and telling our story. And last week, we saw something extraordinary, right? There was an event with Oprah Winfrey and many other very famous people that went on for 2 hours in prime time that was produced by the campaign itself, right? We'd never seen anything really like this before. I mean, I'm just wondering what your thoughts are now, a week later, on the amazing Oprah event.
Yeah, there were so many things that I loved about that event. And kind of first and foremost, as a millennial, and millennials are known to really love nostalgia, it was so nostalgic for my childhood of the old Oprah Winfrey show that would be on TV that my mom would be watching when I would get home from grammar school, the big live audience, and her in the room, but then also integrating that with all of these moments, both with the vice president,
Kamala Harris,
in her most joyful, comfortable state, it felt like, as well as all of these different celebrities and women from so many different generations that provided these incredible clips that I've seen all over TikTok and Instagram in the days since the event. They touched on so many different parts of the campaign, so many of the different constituencies that the campaign is talking to, the different issues and how it affects people. And of course, there's just no one better than Oprah to be able to host a forum like that. And so just tying the nostalgia to the new formats and forums, and to be able to see the vice president in a really comfortable, natural environment, and with so much joy there. It was just really, I thought it was such an excellent event. And it took me by surprise, honestly, right? It didn't feel like a traditional campaign. It didn't feel like a traditional kind of media thing. It almost felt like we were going to like dial for dollars of sorts. And I loved that feeling. It felt like everybody was in the room who was watching. And it was just really special.
Well, and the campaign has an interesting challenge, right? Because usually in a general election, there are three debates and then there's a VP debate. So there are these huge events that are driving people's interests. And right now, we are likely to have just one presidential debate and one vice presidential debate because Trump is not agreeing to a second debate. And the campaign has to maintain that level of interest that usually the debates generate. And so I think the experimentation that we saw there, hopefully, and we see more of it. I also think that we have the opportunity. I mean, I don't know about folks here, but, because of all her rallies are live streamed on YouTube, I will come home and rather than watching MSNBC, I'll go watch one of the rallies, right? And it's incredibly entertaining and exciting. It's some of the best political TV there is. And so I think, the campaign has been very innovative, and hopefully we can have in the coming weeks somebody from the digital team come and talk to us about all the stuff they're inventing this time, because there is an enormous amount of invention and experimentation going on right now that is going to be benefiting our politics for a long time to come.
Yeah. And also we should talk about, because I know the media has been obsessed with, how many interviews the vice president is or is not doing with traditional media, which, I have my own thoughts on this. Why would you spend so much time talking to traditional media that reaches such a fraction of people, and the vast majority of who are already decided and already know who they're going to vote for and how and when they're going to vote? But aside from that, the vice president did do a really big interview with MSNBC's Stephanie Ruhle this week. I know that you watched it.
Yeah.
I think most Americans watched clips on social media, but you watched the whole interview. Tell me, how do you think that she did?
Yeah, well, first of all, I go on Stephanie's show and she's really smart and she's thoughtful. And what I found amazing about that interview is it reminded us that there are two basic ways to do interviews. And you and I are both former journalists, and I worked for ABC News, you worked for CBS News, and we grew up in the business. And I was reminded that there is the kind of deeply adversarial interview that Dana Bash did with the vice president and Governor Walz, a few weeks ago, where everything was kind of a gotcha question and trying to, really push the most negative stuff. And then there was the interview that Stephanie Ruhle did, where she had a serious conversation about serious issues with a serious person over 25 minutes. And I think we learned much more about Kamala Harris and her vision in the Stephanie Ruhle interview than we did in all the gotcha questions that Dana Bash did a few weeks ago. I don't think these kind of adversarial interviews actually inform audiences. I think they're very insidery. You have to sort of know kind of these insider things and they don't end up really conveying a lot of information. I felt last night in watching the Stephanie Ruhle interview that I learned a lot about Kamala Harris. I learned a lot about her vision. Some of it I'd heard before, a lot of it I hadn't. And there's no way that if that interview had been conducted in the more kind of adversarial kind of way that some of these interviews are done, then I would have learned half or or a quarter of what I learned last night. So hats off to Stephanie Ruhle, frankly, for having the courage to not give in to the snark, to give in to the anger, to give in to the adversarial interview, and do kind of an old fashioned interview where you sit down, you talk to a serious person, you let them make their case to the American people. And so I thought it was really good television because we learned a lot. And she was respectful, and she wasn't in a aggressive adversarial position where I think that the viewers lose in those kinds of interviews, even if the interviewer gains. And so I thought it was a really important moment for Kamala Harris because I think it was really, she got to say her piece and we learned a lot. And I thought it was a really important moment in the campaign.
Yeah, it won't surprise anyone that I think this is such an important point. And I really do think, just to underscore what you're saying, Simon, you can hold politicians and powerful people accountable without being adversarial. And I think you put it really, really well, that it was actually, it makes it more about the interviewer. It really is about you as the interviewer. If you're trying to constantly corner and gotcha your interview subject, especially if they're a candidate, and you're trying to kind of prove that you're holding them accountable, but there are other ways of doing that. And obviously, I run an explicitly left-leaning, values-driven news network, and so we have opinion content. We also have a point of view, and we have positions on issues. And so I'm not defending. I'm not suggesting that there shouldn't be objective, or, well, you know how I feel about objective, but that there shouldn't be non-partisan and like hard interviews and hard questions for the vice president. But I do think you're making a really strong point that you're just watching how they can defend themselves in that
Right.
posture, as opposed to being able to explain themselves,
Right.
and respond rather than react to a tone or tenor, or really kind of attack sometimes that it feels like coming from journalists. So I also don't think the adversarial nature of some of these interviews is why the vice president isn't doing more of them. I think my point earlier that, like, is the ROI very good when it comes to reaching the audiences she actually needs to introduce herself and her vision for the country too? I think that's a very important question. And also, I think that, where is her time best spent? And also, there's been a lot of criticism. I think Axios is doing at least a few of these a week in the morning newsletters that I read, going back to other old positions she's had to make the point that the campaign hasn't responded if she still has that position or not. And I think that's a really interesting strategy, because we have to remember that Kamala Harris did not make a decision to run for president this year. This was put on her. She rose to this occasion in a way that was not planned for. And it does not mean that she does not have clear perspectives or points of view or plans. We know that the campaign has plans. We know she has a vision for the future. She has policy plans for the economy and all of the issues that matter to people. She's the fiercest advocate for reproductive rights and freedom. But also, at the same time, she's a human. This campaign went through a massive transition so soon before the election itself. And so being able to give grace and time for them to actually put these plans together, for her to be able to decide the priorities of talking about them, I just don't think that there's always a fair assessment of
Yeah.
this that's at play. And I think that is problematic.
Let me just make one comment on that because this is something that's been making me a little crazy, and I haven't really written about this. But this notion that you hear from commentators that we don't really know what Kamala Harris stands for. And the absurdity of that, first of all, it just comes off to me as, this sort of misogyny adjacent kind of, line about, because look, the Democratic Party and her administration, do we think she's going to depart dramatically from the economic and foreign policy of what has been a very successful political party that has, in our last three presidents that we've elected, have made the country far better again and again and again, that we represent a party who's seen economic growth and opportunity and lower deficits every time that we come into office, and that we understand the values, the liberal values, the Democratic Party, and how we approach foreign policy challenges or how we view about climate change. I mean, is there really any mystery about where she is going to come down on all of these major issues, given that she was in an administration that took incredibly aggressive stances? What she's doing now is we know where she's going to come down on abortion and reproductive health, on climate change, on her economic plans, her foreign policy, right? There could be small little things that may be a little bit different from Biden, but in general, the Democratic Party has been a wildly successful governing party for a very long time, and she's going to fit within some range of the values and ideas and arguments of this party. And I think that this idea that she needs to have a full-blown, like, unbelievable governing agenda within 6 weeks, right? What she's doing on the economy in particular, and this is where I think they're being unbelievably smart. And one of the most important developments of this election is that she's making up significant ground on Trump on who's better to lead the economy. Biden was way behind Trump. This was a big problem for Joe Biden. She's making enormous gains. Some of this is that the economy is better and interest rates are coming down, but their way they're talking about the economy to voters is working. And what's happening is they're rolling out now her agenda, in addition to saying, I want people to get by, not just get by, but get ahead, the opportunity economy, which is very powerful and strong language, in my view, about her values and what she wants out of the economy. She's now putting meat on the bones. And she's been doing it systematically over weeks. And what she's doing is saying, look, we did a lot of stuff under Biden. We got a lot done, but there's a bunch of things we didn't get done that we now need to go do. And she's laying that out. And so this notion that you hear, particularly from Republicans, that she's a blank slate, we don't really know anything about her. It's, in my view, some of the most insane stuff that's being said on television. We know 95% of what she's going to do. What she's filling in is the 5 to 10%, that is stuff that's still undone and unwrestled. She made it very clear that she wants to end the filibuster, to pass, restore Roe. I mean, her positions on many of these issues are very, very clear. And I'm really proud, to your point, I'm unbelievably proud of this campaign. What they've been able to do, what the vice president has been able to do. What's that old line, Tara, that you have to be able to dance with high heels, walking backwards as a woman, right? That everything is like, yeah, I get that old line. What Kamala Harris has had to do and what she's pulled off gracefully, successfully, powerfully, we may be witnessing one of the most extraordinary political campaigns in all of American history in front of our eyes. And I'm just unbelievably proud of what they've been able to do, because the degree of difficulty of what was given to her in July was incredible. And they've done it brilliantly and made, no meaningful mistakes, which in our business is really, I mean, we all make mistakes. It's human, right? You can't really point to a single major consequential mistake that the campaign has made over the last couple of months. And so I'm just really
Which is, by the way,
proud of
something
them.
why
Yeah.
I think the media
Yeah.
is manufacturing controversies. Like, we
Right.
don't know where she stands because they don't have a lot of things to point to. And also, we have to remember,
Yeah.
this is an election between two candidates. She is not running in a vacuum, right? This is like, there is a clear contrast. We know where she stands on the most important issues to voters, like you said, the economy, like reproductive rights and freedom, like immigration, which, by the way, she's not shying away from. She's going to the border in Arizona this
Yeah.
week. She's
Like
not
healthcare, right? We want to keep expanding the ACA, right? Like on the big stuff, it's climate change. Like, it's pretty clear where she is on all this stuff,
And Stephanie Ruhle, who interviewed her, was on Bill Maher a few nights before making this case where it was like, wait a second, we also know where Trump stands on everything. So you have a choice, right? It's not just like, oh, am I going to like choose her policy prescription of this or this in the weeds detailed policy plan for this? It is like, are you going to choose between Donald Trump and everything he stands for and his character or lack thereof, and what he would do to this country and our economy and tank it in order to get his rich friends more tax cuts? Or are we going to go with someone who's been the vice president for the past 4 years that pulled the economy out of a pandemic and the gutter from where Trump left it and put us into the state of economic growth and job growth, and is going to protect our basic rights and freedoms? Like, that is the choice before people. So this debate in the press it just really is irritating.